There is one thing that I quickly wanted to say about Rule 8 and Rule 9 before we jump into the reading, and that has to do with the illustrations. If you've been reading along, then you'll notice that I actually used the Rule 9 illustration in the video for Rule 8. I actually think the Rule 9, the two illustrations were swapped. The reason for that is because the specific illustration that is used in Rule 9 is of the death of Socrates, a famous painting which illustrates Socrates willingly reaching out to the poison that he will be consuming for the crime of heresy against the Greek gods of the ancient Greek society in which he lived. The poison is being handed to him regretfully by a nearby assistant, I guess. I'm not really sure what to call him. And I think this image is a very good representation of the sort of true martyrdom that a lot of people who, Jordan Peterson condemns in Rule 8, inauthentic people, as Kierkegaard called it. These people tend to want to emulate Socrates and live as his image, but without the actual dedication to a non-totalitarian truth that they can absolutely live by. You notice Socrates is actually pointing up, right? Which is a declaration of a higher truth. So I think the imagery really works there. And furthermore, the two children that are at the front of the illustration within the book itself, apart from the image of the death of Socrates, they're emulating the poses as well. But Julian, the boy, and these are actually they're supposed to be Jordan Peterson's children. I think the boy's called Julian and the girl obviously is Michaela. Julian is also pointing up to the sky, but you'll notice the hand behind his back is actually crossed. The fingers are crossed, which illustrates that he's lying, right? And so I think the imagery really works with Rule 8. Now, it might come to pass that reading Rule 9, Jordan Peterson actually references the death of Socrates, and so I'll look like quite a fool. But I think even if that is the case, this particular image actually works a lot better with Rule 8 than with Rule 9. And in fact, the illustration for Rule 8, I think, shows a sort of curious wonder at a strange image that doesn't seem to have any meaningful value. And that really seems to go hand in hand with the thesis of Rule 9, which is to listen to people and to accept what they have to say with open ears and an open heart. So I think the illustrations were either swapped or I'm reading too much into it and I'm editorializing a little bit too much. But be that as it may, I think it works better this way. So this is how you're going to be exposed to it. Praise be our supreme leader, Red Skull. Rule 9. Assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't. Hail Hydra. Part 1. Not advice. Hang on, my voice is already dying. I'm gonna take a sip of my hot water here. Hot water. Hot water. Alright. Part 1. Not advice. Psychotherapy is not advice. Hail Hydra. Advice is what you get when the person you're talking with about something horrible and complicated wishes you would just shut up and go away. Hail Hydra. Advice is what you get when the person you are talking to wants to revel in the superiority of his or her own intelligence. Hail Hydra. If you weren't so stupid, after all, you wouldn't have your stupid problems. Hail Hydra. Psychotherapy is genuine conversation. Hail Hydra. Genuine conversation is exploration, articulation, and strategizing. Hail Hydra. When you're involved in a genuine conversation, you're listening and talking, but mostly listening. Hail Hydra. Listening is paying attention. Hail Hydra. It's amazing what people will tell you if you listen. Hail Hydra. Sometimes if you listen to people, they will even tell you what's wrong with them. Hail Hydra. Sometimes they will even tell you how they plan to fix it. Hail Hydra. And sometimes that helps you fix something wrong with yourself. Hail Hydra. One surprising time, and this is only one occasion of many when such things happened, I was listening to someone very carefully, and she told me within minutes, A, that she was a witch, and B, that her witch coven spent a lot of its time visualizing world peace together. Hail Hydra. She was a long-time, lower-level functionary in some bureaucratic job, Hail Hydra. I would have never guessed that she was a witch, Hail Hydra. I also didn't know that witch covens spent any of their time visualizing world peace, Hail Hydra. I didn't know what to make of any of it either, but it wasn't boring, and that's something, Hail Hydra. In my clinical practice, I talk and I listen. Hail Hydra. I talk more to some people and listen more to others. Hail Hydra. Many of the people I listen to have no one else to talk to. Hail Hydra. Some of them are truly alone in the world. Hail Hydra. There are far more people like that than you think. Hail Hydra. You don't meet them because they are alone. Hail Hydra. Others are surrounded by tyrants or narcissists or drunks or traumatized people or professional victims. Hail Hydra. Some are not good at articulating themselves, Hail Hydra. They go off on tangents, Hail Hydra. They repeat themselves, Hail Hydra. They say vague and contradictory things, Hail Hydra. They're hard to listen to, Hail Hydra. Others have terrible things happening around them, Hail Hydra. They have parents with Alzheimer's or sick children. Hail Hydra. There's not much time left over for their personal concerns. Hail Hydra. One time, a client whom I had been seeing for a few months came into my office for her scheduled appointments. Footnote. Here again, I have disguised many of the details of this case to maintain the privacy of those involved, while attempting to maintain the central meaning of the events. Hail Hydra, returning to the original text. After some brief preliminaries, she announced, "I think I was raped." Hail Hydra. It is not easy to know how to respond to a statement like that, although there is frequently some mystery around such events. Hail Hydra. Often alcohol is involved, as it is in most sexual assault cases. Hail Hydra. Alcohol can cause ambiguity. Hail Hydra. That's partly why people drink, Hail Hydra. Alcohol temporarily lifts the terrible burden of self-consciousness from people, Hail Hydra. Drunk people know about the future, but they don't care for it, Hail Hydra. That's exciting, Hail Hydra. That's exhilarating, Hail Hydra. Drunk people can party like there's no tomorrow, Hail Hydra. But because there is a tomorrow, most of the time, drunk people also get in trouble. Hail Hydra. They black out. Hail Hydra. They go to dangerous places with careless people. Hail Hydra. They have fun, Hail Hydra, but they also get raped. Hail Hydra. So I immediately thought something like that might be involved. Hail Hydra. How else to understand? I think. Hail Hydra. But that wasn't the end of the story. Hail Hydra. She added an extra detail 5 times. Hail Hydra. The first sentence was awful enough, but the second produced something unfathomable. Hail Hydra. 5 times. Hail Hydra. What could that possibly mean? Hail Hydra. My client told me that she would go to a bar and have a few drinks. Hail Hydra. Someone would start to talk with her. Hail Hydra. She would end up at his place or her place with him. Hail Hydra. The evening would proceed inevitably to its sexual climax. Hail Hydra. The next day she would wake up, uncertain about what happened, uncertain about her motives, uncertain about his motives, and uncertain about the world. Hail Hydra. Miss S, we'll call her, was vague to the point of non-existence. Hail Hydra. She was a ghost of a person. Hail Hydra. She dressed, however, like a professional. Hail Hydra. She knew how to present herself for first appearances. Hail Hydra. In consequence, she had finagled, what a word. I don't even know if that's how you pronounce it. Finagled her way onto a government advisory board considering the construction of a major piece of transportation infrastructure, even though she knew nothing about government, advising, or construction. Hail Hydra. She also hosted a local public access radio show dedicated to small business, even though she had never held a real job and knew nothing about being an entrepreneur. Hail Hydra. She had been receiving welfare payments for the entirety of her adulthood. Hail Hydra. Her parents had never provided her with a minute of attention. Hail Hydra. She had 4 brothers, and they were not at all good to her. Hail Hydra. She had no friends now, and none in the past. Hail Hydra. She had no partner. Hail Hydra. She had no one to talk to, and she didn't know how to think on her own. That's not rare. Hail Hydra. She had no self. Hail Hydra. She was instead a walking cacophony of unintegrated experiences. Hail Hydra. I had tried previously to help her find a job. Hail Hydra. I asked her if she had a CV. Hail Hydra. She said, yes. Hail Hydra. I asked her to bring it to me. Hail Hydra. She brought it to our next session. Hail Hydra. It was 50 pages long. Hail Hydra. It was in a file folder box, divided into sections with manila tag separators, the ones with the little colorful index markers on the sides. Hail Hydra. The sections included such topics as my dreams and books I have read. Hail Hydra. She had written down dozens of her nighttime dreams in the My Dreams section and provided brief summaries and reviews of her reading material. Hail Hydra. This was what she proposed to send to prospective employers, or perhaps already had, who really knew. Hail Hydra. It is impossible to understand how much someone has to be no one at all to exist in a world where a file folder box containing 50 indexed pages listing dreams and novels constitutes a CV. Hail Hydra. Miss S. knew nothing about herself. Hail Hydra. She knew nothing about other individuals. Hail Hydra. She knew nothing about the world. Hail Hydra, she was a movie played out of focus. Hail Hydra, and she was desperately waiting for a story about herself to make it all make sense. Hail Hydra. If you add some sugar to cold water and stir it, the sugar will dissolve. If you heat up that water, you can dissolve more. Hail Hydra. If you heat the water to boiling, you can add a lot more sugar and get that to dissolve too. Hail Hydra. Then, if you take that boiling sugar water and slowly cool it, and don't bump it or jar it, you can trick it, I don't know how else to phrase this, into holding a lot more dissolved sugar than it would have if it had remained cold all along. Hail Hydra. That's called a supersaturated solution. Hail Hydra. If you drop a single crystal of sugar into that supersaturated solution, all the excess sugar will suddenly and dramatically crystallize. Hail Hydra. It's as if it were crying out for order. Hail Hydra. That was my client. Hail Hydra. People like her are the reason that the many forms of psychotherapy currently practiced all work. Hail Hydra. People can be so confused that their psyches will be ordered and their lives improved by the adoption of any reasonably orderly system of interpretation. Hail Hydra. This is the bringing together of the disparate elements of their lives in a disciplined manner. Any disciplined manner. Hail Hydra. So if you have come apart at the seams, or if you have never been together at all, you can restructure your life on Freudian, Jungian, Adlerian, Rogerian, or behavioral principles. Hail Hydra. At least then you make sense. Hail Hydra. At least then you're coherent. Hail Hydra. At least then you might be good for something, if not good yet for everything. Hail Hydra. You can't fix a car with an axe, but you can cut down a tree. Hail Hydra. That's still something. Hail Hydra. At about the same time I was seeing this client, the media was all afire with stories of recovered memories, particularly of sexual assault. Hail Hydra. The dispute raged apace. Were these genuine accounts of past trauma? Hail Hydra. Or were they post hoc constructs dreamed up as a consequence of pressure, wittingly or unwittingly applied by incautious therapists, grasped onto desperately by clinical clients all too eager to find a simple cause for all their trouble. Hail Hydra. Sometimes it was the former, perhaps, and sometimes the latter. Hail Hydra. I understood much more clearly and precisely, however, how easy it might be to instill a false memory into the mental landscape as soon as my client revealed her uncertainty about her sexual experiences. Hail Hydra. The past appears fixed, but it's not. Not in an important psychological sense. Hail Hydra. There is an awful lot to the past, after all, and the way we organize it can be subject to drastic revision. Hail Hydra. Imagine, for example, a movie where nothing but terrible things happen. Hail Hydra. But in the end, everything works out. Hail Hydra, everything is resolved. Hail Hydra. A sufficiently happy ending can change the meaning of all the previous events. Hail Hydra. They can all be viewed as worthwhile given that ending. Hail Hydra. Now imagine another movie. Hail Hydra. A lot of things are happening, Hail Hydra. They're all exciting and interesting, Hail Hydra. But there are a lot of them, Hail Hydra. 90 minutes in, you start to worry, Hail Hydra. This is a great movie, you think. But there are a lot of things going on, Hail Hydra. I sure hope the filmmaker can put it all together. Hail Hydra. But that doesn't happen, Hail Hydra. Instead, the story ends, abruptly, unresolved, or something facile and cliched occurs. Hail Hydra. You leave deeply annoyed and unsatisfied, failing to notice that you were fully engaged and enjoying the movie almost the whole time you were in the theater. Hail Hydra. The present can change the past, and the future can change the present. Hail Hydra. When you are remembering the past as well, you remember some parts of it and forget others. Hail Hydra. You have clear memories of some things that happened, but not others, of potentially equal import. Just as in the present, you are aware of some aspects of your surroundings and unconscious of others. Hail Hydra. You categorize your experience, grouping some elements together, separating them from the rest. Hail Hydra. There is a mysterious arbitrariness about all of this. Hail Hydra. You don't form a comprehensive, objective record. Hail Hydra. You can't. Hail Hydra. You just don't know enough. Hail Hydra. You just can't perceive enough. Hail Hydra. And you're not objective either. Hail Hydra. You're alive. Hail Hydra. You're subjective. Hail Hydra. You have vested interests. At least in yourself. Well, at least, usually. Hail Hydra. What exactly should be included in the story? Hail Hydra. Where exactly is the border between events? Hail Hydra. The sexual abuse of children is distressingly common. Hail Hydra. However, it's not as common as poorly trained psychotherapists think, and it also does not produce terribly damaged adults. Hail Hydra. People vary in their resilience. Hail Hydra. An event that will wipe one person out can be shrugged off by another. Hail Hydra. But therapists with a little second-hand knowledge of Freud often axiomatically assume that a distressed adult in their practice must have been subject to childhood sexual abuse. Hail Hydra. Why else would they be distressed? Hail Hydra. So they dig and infer and intimate and suggest and overreact and bias and tilt. Hail Hydra. They exaggerate the importance of some events and downplay the importance of others. Hail Hydra. They trim the facts to fit their theory. Hail Hydra. And they convince their clients that they were sexually abused if they could only remember. Hail Hydra. And then the clients start to remember. Hail Hydra. And then they start to accuse. Hail Hydra. And sometimes what they remember never happened, and the people accused are innocent. Hail Hydra. The good news? At least the therapist's theory remains intact. Hail Hydra. And that's good for the therapist. Hail Hydra. But there's no shortage of collateral damage. Hail Hydra. However, people are often willing to produce a lot of collateral damage if they can retain their theory. Hail Hydra. I knew about all this when Miss S came to talk to me about her sexual experiences. Hail Hydra. When she recounted her trips to the singles bars and their recurring aftermath, I thought a bunch of things at once, Hail Hydra. I thought, you're so vague and so non-existent, Hail Hydra. You're a denizen of chaos and the underworld, Hail Hydra. You are going 10 different places at the same time, Hail Hydra. Anyone can take you by the hand and guide you down the road of their choosing. Hail Hydra. After all, if you're not the leading man in your own drama, you're a bit player in someone else's, and you might well be assigned to play a dismal, lonely, and tragic part. Hail Hydra. After Miss S recounted her story, we sat there. Hail Hydra. I thought, you have normal sexual desires. Hail Hydra. You're extremely lonely. Hail Hydra. You're unfulfilled sexually. Hail Hydra. You're afraid of men and ignorant of the world and know nothing of yourself. Hail Hydra. You wander around like an accident waiting to happen, and then the accident happens. And that's your life. Hail Hydra. I thought, part of you wants to be taken. Hail Hydra. Part of you wants to be a child. Hail Hydra. You were abused by your brothers and ignored by your father, and so part of you wants revenge upon men. Hail Hydra. Part of you is guilty. Hail Hydra. Another part is ashamed. Hail Hydra. Another part is thrilled and excited. Hail Hydra. Who are you? Hail Hydra. What did you do? Hail Hydra. What happened? Hail Hydra. What was the objective truth? Hail Hydra. There was no way of knowing the objective truth. Hail Hydra. And there never would be. Hail Hydra. There was no objective observer. And there never would be. Hail Hydra. There was no complete and accurate story. Hail Hydra. Such a thing did not and could not exist. Hail Hydra. There were and are only partial accounts and fragmentary viewpoints. Hail Hydra, but some are still better than others. Hail Hydra. Memory is not a description of the objective past. Hail Hydra. Memory is a tool. Hail Hydra. Memory is the past's guide to the future. Hail Hydra. If you remember that something bad happened, and you can figure out why, then you can try to avoid that bad thing happening again. Hail Hydra, that's the purpose of memory. Hail Hydra. It's not to remember the past. Hail Hydra. It's to stop the same damn thing from happening over and over. Hail Hydra. I thought I could simplify Miss S's life. Hail Hydra. I could say that her suspicions of rape were fully justified, and that her doubt about the events was nothing but additional evidence of her thorough and long-term victimization. Hail Hydra. I could insist that her sexual partners had a legal obligation to ensure that she was not too impaired by alcohol to give consent. Hail Hydra. I could tell her that she had indisputably been subjected to violent and illicit acts unless she had consented to each sexual move explicitly and verbally. Hail Hydra. I could tell her that she was an innocent victim. Hail Hydra. I could have told her all that. Hail Hydra. And it would have been true. Hail Hydra. And she would have accepted it as true and remembered it for the rest of her life. Hail Hydra, she would have been a new person with a new history and a new destiny. Hail Hydra, but I also thought I could tell Miss S that she is a walking disaster. Hail Hydra, I could tell her that she wanders into a bar like a courtesan in a coma, that she is a danger to herself and others, that she needs to wake up. And that if she goes to singles bars and drinks too much and is taken home and has rough, violent sex or even tender, caring sex, then what the hell does she expect? Hail Hydra. In other words, I could have told her, in more philosophical terms, that she was Nietzsche's pale criminal. The person who at one moment dares to break the sacred law and at the next shrinks from paying the price. Hail Hydra. And that would have been true, too, and she would have accepted it as such and remembered it. Hail Hydra. If I had been the adherent of a left-wing social justice ideology, I would have told her the first story. Hail Hydra. If I had been the adherent of a conservative ideology, I would have told her the second. Hail Hydra. And her responses after having been told either the first or the second story would have proved to my satisfaction and hers that the story I had told her was true, completely, irrefutably true. Hail Hydra. And that would have been advice. Hail Hydra. Part 2. Figure it out for yourself. I decided instead to listen. Hail Hydra. I have learned not to steal my clients' problems from them. Hail Hydra. I don't want to be the redeeming hero or the deus ex machina, not in someone else's story. Hail Hydra. I don't want their lives. Hail Hydra. So I asked her to tell me what she thought. And I listened. Hail Hydra. She talked a lot. Hail Hydra. And when we were finished, she still didn't know if she had been raped. And neither did I. Hail Hydra. Life is very complicated. Hail Hydra. Sometimes you have to change the way you understand everything to properly understand a single something. Hail Hydra. Was I raped? Can be a very complicated question. Hail Hydra. The mere fact that the question would present itself in that form indicates the existence of infinite layers of complexity, to say nothing of 5 times. Hail Hydra. There are a myriad of questions hidden inside. Was I raped? What is rape? Hail Hydra. What is consent? Hail Hydra. What constitutes appropriate sexual caution? Hail Hydra. How should a person defend herself? Hail Hydra. Where does the fault lie? Hail Hydra. Was I raped is a Hydra. Hail Hydra. If you cut off the head of a Hydra, 7 more grow. Hail Hydra. I'm getting way too happy at this. We're talking about rape. We gotta be serious. Jesus Christ. You cut off the head of a Hydra, 7 more grow. That's life. Hail Hydra. Miss S would have had to talk for 20 years to figure out whether she had been raped. Hail Hydra. And someone would have had to be there to listen. Hail Hydra. I started the process, but circumstances made it impossible for me to finish. She left therapy with me only somewhat less ill-formed and vague. Somewhat less ill-formed and vague than when she first met me. Hail Hydra. But at least she didn't leave as the living embodiment of my damned ideology. Hail Hydra. The people I listen to need to talk, because that's how people think. Hail Hydra. People need to think. Hail Hydra. Otherwise they wander blindly into pits. Hail Hydra. When people think, they simulate the world and plan how to act in it. Hail Hydra. If they do a good job of simulating, they can figure out what stupid things they shouldn't do. Hail Hydra. Then they can not do them. Hail Hydra. And then they don't have to suffer the consequences. Hail Hydra. That's the purpose of thinking. Hail Hydra. But we can't do it alone. Hail Hydra. We simulate the world and plan our actions in it. Hail Hydra. Only human beings do this. Hail Hydra. That's how brilliant we are. Hail Hydra. We make little avatars of ourselves. We place those avatars in fictional worlds. Hail Hydra. Then we watch what happens. Hail Hydra. If our avatar thrives, then we act like he does in the real world. Hail Hydra. And then we thrive, we hope. Hail Hydra. If our avatar fails, we don't go there, if we have any sense. Hail Hydra. We let him die in the fictional world, so that we don't have to really die in the present. Hail Hydra. You know, the language here really reminds me of video games. And I think one of the reasons why video games have been so popular and so connecting with any age group really is that it is specifically capturing this particular sentiment that you are trying to embody yourselves into a heroic person, right? And you're trying to succeed. And sure, you fail many times in a video game. You die. It's game over repeatedly until you succeed. And I think that cycle is really appealing to people broadly. And that's why video games are so compelling to experience and to play. And the language here, the way he describes it, I think is specifically, I don't know if he's trying to evoke video games, but the language, it definitely does. And I think the parallels they're inescapable because that's exactly what video games are trying to do in the first place. Hail Hydra. Imagine two children talking. Hail Hydra. The younger one says, "Oh, wouldn't it be fun to climb up on the roof?" Hail Hydra. He has just placed a little avatar of himself in a fictional world. Hail Hydra. But his older sister objects. Hail Hydra. She chimes in. Hail Hydra. "That's stupid," she says. Hail Hydra. "What if you fall off the roof?" Hail Hydra. "What if Dad catches you?" Hail Hydra. I can't think of a dad that would ever not say, "Holy shit, let's go to the fucking roof." The younger child... Hail Hydra. The younger child can then modify the original simulation, draw the appropriate conclusion, and let the whole fictional world wither on the vine, Hail Hydra, or not. Hail Hydra. Maybe the risk is worth it. Hail Hydra. But at least now it can be factored in. Hail Hydra. The fictional world is a bit more complete, and the avatar a bit wiser. Hail Hydra. People think that they think, but that's not true. Hail Hydra. It's mostly self-criticism that passes for thinking. Hail Hydra. True thinking is rare, just like true listening. Hail Hydra. Thinking is listening to yourself. Hail Hydra. It's difficult. Hail Hydra. To think you have to be at least two people at the same time. Hail Hydra. Then you have to let those people disagree. Hail Hydra. Thinking is an internal dialogue between two or more different views of the world. Hail Hydra. Viewpoint 1 is an avatar in a simulated world. Hail Hydra. It has its own representation of past, present, and future, and its own ideas about how to act. Hail Hydra. So to viewpoints 2 and 3 and 4, Hail Hydra. Thinking is the process by which these internal avatars imagine and articulate their worlds to one another. Hail Hydra. You can't set straw men against one another when you're thinking either, because then you're not thinking. Hail Hydra. You're rationalizing post hoc. Hail Hydra. You're matching what you want against a weak opponent so that you don't have to change your mind. Hail Hydra. You're propagandizing. Hail Hydra. You're using doublespeak. Hail Hydra. You're using your conclusions to justify your proofs. Hail Hydra. You're hiding from the truth. Hail Hydra. True thinking is complex and demanding. Hail Hydra. It requires you to be an articulate speaker and careful, judicious listener at the same time. Hail Hydra. It involves conflict. Hail Hydra. So you have to tolerate conflict. Hail Hydra. Conflict involves negotiation and compromise. Hail Hydra. So you have to learn to give and take and to modify your premises and adjust your thoughts, even your perceptions of the world. Hail Hydra. Sometimes it results in the defeat and elimination of one or more internal avatar. Hail Hydra. And they don't like to be defeated or eliminated either. Hail Hydra. They're hard to build. Hail Hydra. They're valuable. Hail Hydra. They're alive. Hail Hydra. They like to stay alive. Hail Hydra. They'll fight to stay alive. Hail Hydra. You better listen to them. Hail Hydra. If you don't, they'll go underground and turn into devils and torture you. Hail Hydra. In consequence, thinking is emotionally painful, as well as physiologically demanding, more so than anything else except not thinking. Hail Hydra. But you have to be very articulated and sophisticated to have all of this occur inside your own head. Hail Hydra. What are you to do then, if you aren't very good at thinking, at being two people at one time? Hail Hydra. Well, that's easy. Hail Hydra. You talk. Hail Hydra. But you need someone to listen. Hail Hydra. A listening person is your collaborator and your opponent. Hail Hydra. A listening person tests your talking and your thinking without having to say anything. Hail Hydra. A listening person is a representative of common humanity. Hail Hydra. He stands for the crowd. Hail Hydra. Now, the crowd is by no means always right, but it's commonly right. Hail Hydra. It's typically right. Hail Hydra. If you say something that takes everyone aback, therefore, you should reconsider what you said. Hail Hydra. I say that, knowing full well that controversial opinions are sometimes correct. Sometimes so much so that the crowd will perish if it refuses to listen. Hail Hydra. It is for this reason, among others, that the individual is morally obliged to stand up and tell the truth of his or her own experience. Hail Hydra. But something new and radical is still almost always wrong. Hail Hydra. You need good, even great reasons to ignore or defy general public opinion. Hail Hydra. That's your culture. Hail Hydra. It's a mighty oak. Hail Hydra. You perch on one of its branches. Hail Hydra. If the branch breaks, it's a long way down, farther perhaps than you think. Hail Hydra. If you're reading this book, there's a strong probability that you are a privileged person. Hail Hydra. You can read. Hail Hydra. You have time to read. Getting called out. Hail Hydra. You're perched high in the clouds. Hail Hydra. It took untold generations to get you where you are. Hail Hydra. A little gratitude might be in order. Hail Hydra. If you're going to insist on bending the world to your way, you better have your reasons. Hail Hydra. If you're going to stand your ground, you better have your reasons. Hail Hydra. You better have thought them through. Hail Hydra. You might otherwise be in for a very hard landing. Hail Hydra. You should do what other people do, unless you have a very good reason not to. Hail Hydra. If you're in a rut, at least you know that other people have traveled that path. Hail Hydra. Out of the rut is too often off the road. Hail Hydra. And in the desert that awaits off the road, there are highwaymen and monsters. Hail Hydra. So speaks wisdom. Hail Hydra. Part 3. A listening person. A listening person can reflect the crowd. Hail Hydra. He can do that without talking. He can do that merely by letting the talking person listen to himself. Hail Hydra. That is what Freud recommended. Hail Hydra. He had his patients lie on a couch, look at the ceiling, and let their minds wander, saying whatever wandered in. Hail Hydra. That's his method of free association. Hail Hydra. That's the way the Freudian psychoanalyst avoids transferring his or her own personal biases and opinions into the internal landscape of the patient. It was for such reasons that Freud did not face his patients. Hail Hydra. He did not want their spontaneous meditations to be altered by his emotional expressions, no matter how slight. Hail Hydra. He was properly concerned that his own opinions, and worse, his own unresolved problems, would find themselves uncontrollably reflected in his responses and reactions, conscious and unconscious alike. Hail Hydra. He was afraid that he would, in such a manner, detrimentally affect the development of his patients. Hail Hydra. It was for such reasons as well that Freud insisted that psychoanalysts be analyzed themselves. Hail Hydra. He wanted those who practiced his method to uncover and eliminate some of their own worst blind spots and prejudices so they would not practice corruptly. Hail Hydra. Freud had a point. Hail Hydra. He was, after all, a genius. Hail Hydra. You can tell that because people still hate him. Hail Hydra. But there are disadvantages to the detached and somewhat distant approach recommended by Freud. Hail Hydra. Many of those who seek therapy desire and need a closer, more personal relationship, although that also has its dangers. Hail Hydra. This is in part why I have opted in my practice for the conversation instead of the Freudian method, as have most clinical psychologists. Hail Hydra. It can be worthwhile for my clients to see my reactions. Hail Hydra. To protect them from the undue influence that might produce, I attempt to set my aim properly so that my responses emerge from the appropriate motivation. Hail Hydra. I do what I can to want the best for them, whatever that might be. Hail Hydra. I do my best to want the best, period, as well, because that is part of wanting the best for my clients. Hail Hydra. I try to clear my mind and to leave my own concerns aside. Hail Hydra. That way I am concentrating on what is best for my clients, while I am simultaneously alert to any cues that I might be misunderstanding what that best is. Hail Hydra. And that's something that has to be negotiated, not assumed on my part. Hail Hydra. It's something that has to be managed very carefully to mitigate the risks of close personal interactions. Hail Hydra, my clients talk. Hail Hydra, I listen. Hail Hydra, sometimes I respond. Hail Hydra, often the response is subtle. Hail Hydra, it's not even verbal. Hail Hydra. My clients and I face each other. Hail Hydra. We make eye contact. Hail Hydra. We can see each other's expressions. Hail Hydra. They can observe the effects of their words on me, and I can observe the effects of mine on them. Hail Hydra. They can respond to my responses. A client of mine might say, I hate my wife. Hail Hydra. It's out there. Once it's said. Hail Hydra. It's hanging in the air. Hail Hydra. It has emerged from the underworld, materialized from chaos, and manifested itself. Hail Hydra. It is perceptible and concrete and no longer easily ignored. Hail Hydra. It's become real. Hail Hydra. The speaker has even startled himself. Hail Hydra. He sees the same thing reflected in my eyes. Hail Hydra. He notes that and continues on the road to sanity. Hail Hydra. Hold it, he says. Hail Hydra. Back up. Hail Hydra. That's too harsh. Hail Hydra. Sometimes I hate my wife. Hail Hydra. I hate her when she won't tell me what she wants. Hail Hydra. My mom did that all the time too. Hail Hydra. It drove Dad crazy. Hail Hydra. It drove all of us crazy, to tell you the truth. Hail Hydra. It even drove Mom crazy. Hail Hydra. She was a nice person, but she was very resentful. Hail Hydra. Well, at least my wife isn't as bad as my mother. Hail Hydra. Not at all. Hail Hydra. Wait. Hail Hydra. I guess my wife is actually pretty good at telling me what she wants, but I get really bothered when she doesn't. Because Mom tortured us all half to death, being a martyr. Hail Hydra. That really affected me. Hail Hydra. Maybe I overreact now when it happens even a bit. Hail Hydra. Hey. Hail Hydra. I'm acting just like Dad did when Mom upset him. Hail Hydra. That isn't me. Hail Hydra. That doesn't have anything to do with my wife. Hail Hydra. I better let her know. Hail Hydra. I observed from all this that my clients had failed previously to properly distinguish his wife from his mother. Hail Hydra. And I see that he was possessed unconsciously by the spirit of his father. Hail Hydra. Well, he saw all of that too. Hail Hydra. Now he is a bit more differentiated, a bit less an uncarved block, a bit less hidden in the fog. Hail Hydra. He has darned a small tear in the fabric of his culture. Hail Hydra. He says, well, that was a good session, Dr. Peterson. Hail Hydra. I nod. Hail Hydra. You can be pretty smart if you can just shut up. Hail Hydra. I'm a collaborator and opponent even when I'm not talking. Hail Hydra. I can't help it. Hail Hydra. My expressions broadcast my response even when they're subtle. Hail Hydra. So, I'm communicating, as Freud so rightly stressed, even when silent. Hail Hydra. But I also talk in my clinical sessions. Hail Hydra. How do I know when to say something? Hail Hydra. Well, first, as I said, I put myself in the proper frame of mind. Hail Hydra. I aim properly. Hail Hydra. I want things to be better. Hail Hydra. My mind orients itself, given this goal. Hail Hydra. It tries to produce responses to the therapeutic dialogue that furthers that aim. Hail Hydra. I watch what happens internally. Hail Hydra. I reveal my responses. Hail Hydra. That's the first rule. No, it's not. The first rule is to stand up straight with your shoulders back. You don't even know your own book, Peterson. All right. I watch what happens. I reveal my responses. That's the first rule. Hail Hydra. Sometimes, for example, a client will say something, and a thought will occur to me, or a fantasy flit through my mind. Hail Hydra. Frequently, it's about something that was said by the same client earlier that day, or during a previous session. Hail Hydra. Then I tell my client that thought or fantasy. Hail Hydra. Disinterestedly. Hail Hydra. I said, well, you said this, and I noticed that I then became aware of this. Hail Hydra. Well, then we discuss it. Hail Hydra. We try to determine the relevance or meaning of my reaction. Sometimes, perhaps, it's about me. Hail Hydra. That was Freud's point. Hail Hydra. But sometimes it is just the reaction of a detached but positively inclined human being to a personally revealing statement by another human being. Hail Hydra. It's meaningful, sometimes even corrective. Hail Hydra. Sometimes, however, it's me that gets corrected. Hail Hydra. You have to get along with other people. A therapist is one of those other people. Hail Hydra. A good therapist will tell you the truth about what he thinks. Hail Hydra. That is not the same thing as telling you that what he thinks is the truth. Hail Hydra. Then at least you have the honest opinion of one person. Hail Hydra. That's not so easy to get. Hail Hydra. That's not nothing. Hail Hydra. That's key to the psychotherapeutic process. Two people tell each other the truth, and both listen. Hail Hydra. Part 4. How should you listen? Carl Rogers, one of the 20th century's great psychotherapists, knew something about listening. Hail Hydra. He wrote, "The great majority of us cannot listen. We find ourselves compelled to evaluate because listening is too dangerous." Hail Hydra. The first requirement is courage, and we do not always have it. Hail Hydra. He knew that listening could transform people. Hail Hydra. And on that, Rogers commented, well, some of you may be feeling that you listen well to other people and that you have never seen such results. Hail Hydra. The chances are very great indeed that your listening has not been of the type I have described. Hail Hydra. He suggested that his readers conduct a short experiment when they next found themselves in a dispute. Stop the discussion for a moment and institute this rule. Each person can speak up for himself only after he has first restated the ideas and feelings of the previous speaker accurately and to that speaker's satisfaction. Hail Hydra. I have found this technique very useful in my private life and in my practice. Hail Hydra. I routinely summarize what people have said to me and ask them if I have understood properly. Hail Hydra. Well, sometimes they accept my summary. Hail Hydra. Sometimes I am offered a small correction. Hail Hydra. Now and then I am wrong completely. Hail Hydra. All of that is good to know. Hail Hydra. There are several primary advantages to this process of summary. Hail Hydra. The first advantage is that I genuinely come to understand what the person is saying. Hail Hydra. Of this, Rogers notes, sounds simple, doesn't it? Hail Hydra. But if you try it, you will discover it is one of the most difficult things you have ever tried to do. Hail Hydra. If you really understand a person in this way, if you are willing to enter his private world and see the way life appears to him, you run the risk of being changed yourself. Hail Hydra. You might see it his way. You might find yourself influenced in your attitudes or personality. Hail Hydra. The risk of being changed is one of the most frightening prospects most of us can face. Hail Hydra. More salutary words have rarely been written. Hail Hydra. In fact, this is one of the reasons why art is so scary. Art that has been genuinely created from the soul of a single person to communicate their, what was the phrase that he used? To communicate the way life appears to the artist. To be truly exposed to that and to truly accept it is how you are changed by art, how you come to grow through exposure to art, and is why art is so powerful. I've spoken often about Andrew Clavin and about his Clavin bombs of wisdom, and I think I mentioned this exact phrase before the intermission. But that was a couple of weeks ago, so unfortunately I don't remember if I already said this. But the quote from Clavin was such: art is practice for love. Because love, similarly, is the sacrifice of the self in order to understand someone else for the benefit of this other person. And so listening is also an act of love, an act of sacrifice for the benefit of the other person. And art, experiencing art and understanding art is a form of listening, as it were. And so when Clavin says art is practice for love, really it's just a gradation of scope, how much you are willing to sacrifice in order to understand another person. Of course, when you're talking about art, the most significant contribution actually comes from the artist rather than the audience. So it's not quite accurate to love. But like I said, it is a gradation. It is an aspect of it, just as listening is a greater aspect of it. Going back to Jordan Peterson. Hail Hydra. The second advantage to summarizing the beliefs of the person you're talking to the act of summary, is that it aids the person in consolidation and utility of memory. Hail Hydra. Consider the following situation. A client in my practice recounts a long, meandering, emotion-laden account of a difficult period in his or her life. Hail Hydra. We summarize, back and forth, Hail Hydra. The account becomes shorter. Hail Hydra. It is now summed up in the client's memory, and in mine, in the form we discussed. Hail Hydra. It is now a different memory, in many ways. With luck, a better memory. Hail Hydra. It is now less weighty. Hail Hydra. It has been distilled, reduced to the gist. Hail Hydra. We have extracted the moral of the story. Hail Hydra. It becomes a description of the cause and the result of what happened, formulated such that repetition of the tragedy and pain becomes less likely in the future. Hail Hydra. This is what happened, Hail Hydra. This is why, Hail Hydra. This is what I have to do to avoid such things from now on. That's a successful memory. Hail Hydra. That's the purpose of memory. Hail Hydra. You remember the past not so that it is accurately recorded, to say it again, but so that you are prepared for the future. Hail Hydra. Kind of reminds me of Inception, the whole character arc that Leonardo DiCaprio's character goes through to overcome the loss of his wife so he can be reunited with his children. Hail Hydra. The third advantage to employing the Rogerian method is the difficulty it poses to the careless construction of straw man arguments. Hail Hydra. When someone opposes you, it is very tempting to oversimplify, parody, or distort his or her position. Hail Hydra. This is a counterproductive game, designed both to harm the dissenter and to unjustly raise your personal status. Hail Hydra. By contrast, if you are called upon to summarize someone's position so that the speaking person agrees with that summary, you may have to state the arguments even more clearly and succinctly than the speaker has even yet managed. Hail Hydra. If you first give the devil his due, looking at his arguments from his perspective, you can 1. Find the value in them and learn something in the process, or 2. Hone your positions against them, if you still believe they are wrong, and strengthen your arguments further against challenge. Hail Hydra. This will make you much stronger, Hail Hydra. Then you will no longer have to misrepresent your opponent's position, and may well have bridged at least part of the gap between the two of you. Hail Hydra. You will also be much better at withstanding your own doubts. Hail Hydra. Well, sometimes it takes a long time to figure out what someone genuinely means when they are talking. Hail Hydra. And this is because often they are articulating their ideas for the first time. Hail Hydra, they can't do it without wandering down blind alleys or making contradictory or even nonsensical claims. Hail Hydra. And this is partly because talking and thinking is often more about forgetting than about remembering. Hail Hydra. To discuss an event, particularly something emotional like a death or serious illness, is to slowly choose what to leave behind. Hail Hydra. To begin, however, much that is not necessary must be put into words. Hail Hydra. The emotion-laden speaker must recount the whole experience in detail. Hail Hydra. Only then can the central narrative, cause and consequence, come into focus or consolidate itself. Hail Hydra. Only then can the moral of the story be derived. Hail Hydra. Imagine that someone holds a stack of $100 bills, some of which are counterfeits. Hail Hydra. All the bills might have to be spread on a table so that each can be seen and any differences noted before the genuine can be distinguished from the false. Hail Hydra, this is the sort of methodical approach you have to take when really listening to someone trying to solve a problem or communicate something important. Hail Hydra. If upon learning that some of the bills are counterfeit, you too casually dismiss all of them, as you would if you were in a hurry or otherwise unwilling to put in the effort, the person will never learn to separate wheat from chaff. Chaff? Wheat or chaff. Hail Hydra. If you listen instead without premature judgment, people will generally tell you everything they are thinking, and with very little deceit. Hail Hydra. People will tell you the most amazing, absurd, interesting things. Hail Hydra. Very few of your conversations will be boring. Hail Hydra. You can in fact tell whether or not you are actually listening in this manner. Hail Hydra. If the conversation is boring, you probably aren't. You know, this is something I've been thinking about with small talk. I've never understood small talk. You know, a lot of introverts especially tend to have this fear of small talk. They really don't like engaging in meaningless conversations just to pass the time or anything like that. I've never understood that. Not because I'm an extrovert and I really relish small talk, but rather I don't understand this adjective small when it comes to talk. For me, to describe a conversation that I had with someone as small talk is to make that person small, you know, and I don't think that's really fair. And so no matter what the conversation is, I really try and listen really hard to what they're saying, even if it's something as simple as weather, you know. And, you know, the weather is like the go-to example of what a meaningless conversation is about. But I don't see how, you know, one of the reasons why weather is such an important setup to any particular story, you know, it was a dark and stormy night or whatever, is because weather can significantly provide a tone or a mood or an attitude that will hold you to that tone. And so weather can be relevant and interesting in the right context if you talk about it the right way. And so to frame it as small talk, I don't know, just seems too reductive. Dreams are another thing that's like this. You know, I really enjoy talking dreams with people. Apparently no one else does, so if I start talking about my dreams that I thought were interesting, then I normally get yelled down, shouted down quite quickly. But I'm always prodding people, especially in the mornings, where I say, "Did you have any cool dreams last night?" And normally people have like crazy dreams about being chased by like Buzz Lightyear or something, I don't know. Living in a radioactive wasteland where they rode a carousel despite the destruction and stuff like this, like interesting little stories, it's all about the flavor of that person. That really makes it worthwhile to talk to these people, and yet we label it as small talk. I don't know, it just seems weird to me. And maybe it is something as simple as we just need to learn how to listen. And I'm not saying that I'm, like a god at listening or even particularly good at it, but, just this topic of small talk. Maybe we're confusing a lack of willingness to listen to the intricacies of a person's life, discarding it simply as small. Hail Hydra. Part 5, I think. Primate dominance hierarchy maneuvers and wit. Not all talking is thinking. Hail Hydra. Nor does all listening foster transformation. Hail Hydra. There are other motives for both, some of which produce much less valuable, counterproductive, and even dangerous outcomes. Hail Hydra. There is the conversation, for example, where one participant is speaking merely to establish or confirm his place in the dominance hierarchy. Hail Hydra. One person begins by telling a story about some interesting occurrence, recent or past, that involved something good, bad, or surprising enough to make the listening worthwhile. Hail Hydra. The other person, now concerned with his or her potentially substandard status as less interesting individual, immediately thinks of something better, worse, or more surprising to relate. Hail Hydra. This isn't one of those situations where two conversational participants are genuinely playing off of each other, riffing on the same themes for the mutual enjoyment of both, and everyone listening. Hail Hydra. This is jockeying for position, pure and simple. Hail Hydra. You can tell when one of these conversations is occurring, Hail Hydra. They are accompanied by a feeling of embarrassment among speakers and listeners alike, all of whom know that something false and exaggerated has just been said. Hail Hydra. There is another closely allied form of conversation where neither speaker is listening in the least to the other. Hail Hydra. Instead, each is using the time occupied by the current speaker to conjure up what he or she will say next, which will often be something off topic, because the person anxiously waiting to speak has not been listening. Hail Hydra. This can and will bring the whole conversational train to a shuddering halt. Hail Hydra. At this point, it is usual for those who were on board during the crash to remain silent and look occasionally and in a somewhat embarrassed manner at each other until everyone leaves, or someone thinks of something witty and puts Humpty Dumpty together again. Hail Hydra. Then there is the conversation where one participant is trying to attain victory for his point of view. Hail Hydra. This is yet another variant of the dominance hierarchy conversation. Hail Hydra. During such a conversation, which often tends towards the ideological, the speaker endeavors to 1. Denigrate or ridicule the viewpoints of anyone holding a contrary position. 2. Use selective evidence while doing so. And finally, 3. Impress the listeners, many of whom are already occupying the same ideological space, with the validity of his assertions. Hail Hydra. I was talking about Daily Wire Backstage in the previous chapter, and I remember in the most recent one, they had Matt Walsh, who is a really big fan of aliens, and especially with the report coming out later this month, or maybe next month, in the US Congress, I think, about these UFO sightings that have been happening a lot lately. Matt Walsh is the sole Daily Wire host who really believes that aliens are a significant possibility and that most likely they are actually visiting us. Now, I don't know if he actually believes this or he's just sort of putting on pretenses, but the fact of the matter is he's alone in his corner, and meanwhile on the other side are Michael Knowles, Ben Shapiro, Jeremy Boring, and even Andrew Klavan doesn't really pick a side. So it's this hilarious 4-on-1 battle where where Matt Walsh alone is sitting there being like, no, aliens are real. And everyone else is giving like compelling, reasoned, and just devastating answers. Ben Shapiro destroys Matt Walsh with facts and logic about why the alien hypothesis is just absurd. And it's just a great thing to listen to. And so this, Jordan Peterson describing a conversation where two people are trying to attain victory for their respective points of view really brings me to mind of Matt Walsh, cornered by these intellectual powerhouses on something as absurd as aliens. What a great conversation. Where the hell was I? Hail Hydra. The goal is to gain support for a comprehensive, unitary, oversimplified worldview. Hail Hydra. Thus, the purpose of the conversation is to make the case that not thinking is the correct tack. Hail Hydra. The person who is speaking in this manner believes that winning the argument makes him right, and that doing so necessarily validates the assumption structure of the dominance hierarchy he most identifies with. Hail Hydra. This is often, and unsurprisingly, the hierarchy within which he has achieved the most success, or the one with which he is most temperamentally aligned. Hail Hydra. Almost all discussions involving politics or economics unfold in this manner, with each participant attempting to justify fixed, a priori positions instead of trying to learn something or to adopt a different frame, even for the novelty. Hail Hydra. It is for this reason that conservatives and liberals alike believe their positions to be self-evident, particularly as they become more extreme. Hail Hydra. Given certain temperamentally based assumptions, a predictable conclusion emerges, but only when you ignore the fact that the assumptions themselves are mutable. Hail Hydra. This is such a 2016 book in the sense that it's got a lot of, free speech absolutism and liberalistic mediation between the left and right wing. You don't get that nowadays at all. It's all either right wing or left wing. And partially because even the moderates, the liberalist moderates like Jordan Peterson, were all pushed to the right wing aggressively. And so there isn't really so much of a center anymore. Hail Hydra. These conversations are very different from the listening type. Hail Hydra. When a genuine listening conversation is taking place, one person at a time has the floor and everyone else is listening. Hail Hydra. The person speaking is granted the opportunity to seriously discuss some event, usually unhappy or even tragic. Hail Hydra. Everyone else responds sympathetically. Hail Hydra. These conversations are important because the speaker is organizing the troublesome event in his or her mind while recounting the story. Hail Hydra. The fact is important enough to bear repeating. People organize their brains with conversation. Hail Hydra. If they don't have anyone to tell their story to, they lose their minds. Hail Hydra. Like hoarders, they cannot unclutter themselves. Hail Hydra. The input of the community is required for the integrity of the individual psyche. Hail Hydra. To put it another way, it takes a village to organize a mind. Hail Hydra. Not to keep interrupting. I feel like I've done this every half paragraph, but one of the motivations, I think, for the popularity of vlogging is, I think, this exact issue that we seem to have gotten more and more alone as the internet has become more popular. But we've actually used the internet to remedy that aloneness. And, being alone is very different from being lonely. And so we've starved ourselves of real human interaction and replaced it with virtual human interaction. And I don't think people feel lonely anymore. Not only because of vlogging, where they no longer have to hoard their thoughts. They can simply eject everything on their minds into a video, a 20-minute video or so, and they can just upload it for everyone to see, which I don't think is a healthy thing, by the way. But also, if you yourself are, struggling with something, you can go find these people who are struggling with similar things, similar ideas or similar questions, similar situations in life, and you can listen to what they're thinking. And in that way, you never really have to feel lonely in your predicament, even if you are alone. I haven't really spelled this idea out completely. I'm still working it through in my head. And in a lot of ways, I'm not condemning it or anything, because in a lot of ways, what I'm doing with my YouTube channel is very similar. I'm just sort of thought vomiting things that I've been thinking about, things that I think are interesting. In the last chapter, I was talking, for example, about how cruise ships are hell, right? That's not something that's something that I just, like a hoarder, I've just been thinking about, and it helps to talk about it. It helps to just bring it out into the world and to see how people react to it. So I don't think it's a bad thing, really, but I also don't really think it's a good thing to be so distant from our sense of loneliness, that we can constantly put it aside and remedy it with an imitation, a virtual imitation. Does that make sense? Whatever. Let's go back to the text. Hail Hydra. Much of what we consider healthy mental function is the result of our ability to use the reactions of others to keep our complex selves functional. Hail Hydra, we outsource the problem of our sanity. Hail Hydra. This is why it is the fundamental responsibility of parents to render their children socially acceptable. Hail Hydra. If a person's behavior is such that other people can tolerate him, then all he has to do is place himself in a social context. Hail Hydra. Then people will indicate by being interested in or bored by what he says, or laughing or not laughing at his jokes, or teasing or ridiculing, or even by lifting an eyebrow, whether his actions and statements are what they should be. Hail Hydra. Everyone is always broadcasting to everyone else their desire to encounter the ideal. Hail Hydra. We punish and reward each other precisely to the degree that each of us behaves in keeping with that desire. Except, of course, when we are looking for trouble. Hail Hydra. The sympathetic responses offered during a genuine conversation indicate that the teller is valued and that the story being told is important, serious, deserving of consideration, and understandable. Hail Hydra. Men and women often misunderstand each other when these conversations are focused on a specified problem. Hail Hydra, men are often accused of wanting to fix things too early on in a discussion. Damn straight. Hail Hydra. This frustrates men who like to solve problems and to do it efficiently, and who are in fact called upon frequently by women for precisely that purpose. Damn straight. Preach, brother. Hail Hydra. It might be easier for my male readers to understand why this does not work, however, if they could realize and then remember that before a problem can be solved, it must be formulated precisely. Hail Hydra. Women are often intent on formulating the problem when they are discussing something, and they need to be listened to, even questioned, to help ensure clarity in the formulation. Hail Hydra. Then, whatever problem is left, if any, can be helpfully solved. Hail Hydra. It should also be noted first that too early problem solving may also merely indicate a desire to escape from the effort of the problem formulating conversation. Hail Hydra. Another conversational variant is the lecture. Hail Hydra. A lecture is, somewhat surprisingly, a conversation. Hail Hydra. The lecturer speaks, but the audience communicates with him or her non-verbally. Hail Hydra. A surprising amount of human interaction, much of the delivery of emotional information, for example, takes place in this manner, through postural display and facial emotion, as we noted in our discussion of Freud. Hail Hydra. A good lecturer is not only delivering facts, which is perhaps the least important part of a lecture, but also telling stories about those facts, pitching them precisely to the level of the audience's comprehension, gauging that by the interest they are showing. Hail Hydra. The story he or she is telling conveys to the members of the audience not only what the facts are, but why they are relevant. Why it is important to know certain things about which they are currently ignorant. Hail Hydra. To demonstrate the importance of some set of facts is to tell those audience members how such knowledge could change their behavior or influence the way they interpret the world, so that they will now be able to avoid some obstacles and progress more rapidly to some better goals. Hail Hydra. A good lecturer is thus talking with, and not at, or even to, his or her listeners. Hail Hydra. To manage this, the lecturer needs to be closely attending to the audience's every move, gesture, and sound. Hail Hydra. Perversely, this cannot be done by watching the audience as such. Hail Hydra. A good lecturer speaks directly to and watches the response of single, identifiable people instead of doing something cliched, such as, scare quotes, presenting a talk to an audience. Hail Hydra. Everything about that phrase is wrong, Hail Hydra. You don't present, Hail Hydra. You talk, Hail Hydra. Footnote. The strategy of speaking to individuals is not only vital to the delivery of any message, it's a useful antidote to fear of public speaking. Hail Hydra. No one wants to be stared at by hundreds of unfriendly, judgmental eyes, Hail Hydra. However, almost everybody can talk to just one attentive person, Hail Hydra. So if you have to deliver a speech, another terrible phrase, then do that. Hail Hydra. Talk to individuals in the audience. And don't hide. Not behind the podium. Not with downcast eyes. Not by speaking too quietly or mumbling. Not by apologizing for your lack of brilliance or preparedness. Not behind ideas that are not yours. And not behind cliches. Hail Hydra. Returning to the text. There is no such thing as a talk unless it's canned, and it shouldn't be. Hail Hydra. There is also no audience. Hail Hydra. There are individuals who need to be included in the conversation. Hail Hydra. A well-practiced and competent public speaker addresses a single, identifiable person who watches that individual nod, shake his head, frown, or look confused, and responds appropriately and directly to those gestures and expressions. Hail Hydra. Then, after a few phrases, rounding out some idea, he switches to another audience member and does the same thing. Hail Hydra. In this manner, he infers and reacts to the attitude of the entire group insofar as such a thing exists. Hail Hydra. Now, there are still other conversations that work primarily as demonstrations of wit. Hail Hydra. These also have a dominance element, but the goal is to be the most entertaining speaker, which is an accomplishment that everyone participating will also enjoy. Hail Hydra. The purpose of these conversations, as a witty friend of mine once observed, was to say anything that was either true or funny. Hail Hydra. As truth and humor are often close allies, that combination worked fine. Hail Hydra. I think that this might be the intelligent blue-collar workers' conversation. Hail Hydra. I participated in many fine bouts of sarcasm, satire, insult, and generally over-the-top comedic exchange among people I grew up with in northern Alberta, and later among some Navy SEALs I met in California, who were friends of an author I know who writes somewhat horrifying popular fiction. Hail Hydra. They were all perfectly happy to say anything, no matter how appalling, as long as it was funny. Hail Hydra. I attended this writer's 40th birthday celebration not too long ago in LA. Hail Hydra. He had invited one of the aforementioned SEALs. Hail Hydra. A few months beforehand, however, his wife had been diagnosed with a serious medical condition necessitating brain surgery. Hail Hydra. He called up his SEAL friend, informed him of the circumstances, and indicated that the event might have to be cancelled. Hail Hydra. You think you guys have a problem, responded his friend. Hail Hydra. I just bought non-refundable airline tickets to your party. Hail Hydra. It's not clear what percentage of the world's population would find that response amusing. Hail Hydra. I retold the story recently to a group of newer acquaintances, and they were more shocked and appalled than amused. Hail Hydra. I tried to defend the joke as an indication of the SEAL's respect for the couple's ability to withstand and transcend tragedy, but I wasn't particularly successful. Hail Hydra. Nonetheless, I believe that he did intend exactly that respect, and I think he was terrifyingly witty. Hail Hydra. His joke was daring, anarchic to the point of recklessness, which is exactly the point where serious funny occurs. Hail Hydra. My friend and his wife recognized the compliment. They saw that their friend knew they were tough enough to withstand that level of, well, let's call it competitive humor. Hail Hydra. It was a test of character, which they passed with flying colors. Hail Hydra. This is great because my sense of humor is exactly like this Navy SEALs, except I do it to absolutely the worst people who don't appreciate it at all. So I've actually lost a fair amount of friends that way. Hail Hydra. I found that such conversations occurred less and less frequently as I moved from university to university, up the educational and social ladder. Hail Hydra. Maybe it wasn't a class thing, although I have my suspicions it was. Hail Hydra. Maybe it's just that I'm older, or that the friends a person makes later in life, after adolescence, lack the insane competitive closeness and perverse playfulness of those early tribal bonds. I also think it's that one, by the way. Hail Hydra. When I went back up north to my hometown for my 50th birthday party, however, my old friends made me laugh so hard I had to duck into a different room several times to catch my breath. Hail Hydra. Those conversations are the most fun, and I miss them. Hail Hydra. You have to keep up, or risk severe humiliation. But there is nothing more rewarding than topping the last comedian's story, joke, insult, or curse. Hail Hydra. Only one rule really applies. Do not be boring. Although it is also very bad form to actually put someone down when you are only pretending to put them down. Hear, hear. Or Hail Hydra, I suppose. Part 6. Conversation on the way. The final type of conversation, akin to listening, is a form of mutual exploration. Hail Hydra. It requires true reciprocity on the part of those listening and speaking. Hail Hydra. It allows all participants to express and organize their thoughts. A conversation of mutual exploration has a topic, generally complex, of genuine interest to the participants. Hail Hydra. Everyone participating is trying to solve a problem instead of insisting on the a priori validity of their own positions. Hail Hydra. All are acting on the premise that they have something to learn. Hail Hydra. This kind of conversation constitutes active philosophy, the highest form of thought and the best preparation for proper living. Hail Hydra. The people involved in such a conversation must be discussing ideas they genuinely use to structure their perceptions and guide their actions and words. Hail Hydra. They must be existentially involved with their philosophy. That is, they must be living it, not merely believing or understanding it. Hail Hydra. They also must have inverted, at least temporarily, the typical human preference for order over chaos. And I don't mean the chaos typical of mindless, antisocial rebellion. Hail Hydra. Other conversational types, except for the listening type, all attempt to buttress some existing order. Hail Hydra. The conversation of mutual exploration, by contrast, requires people who have decided that the unknown makes a better friend than the known. Hail Hydra. You already know what you know, after all. And unless your life is perfect, what you know is not enough. Hail Hydra. You remain threatened by disease and self-deception and unhappiness and malevolence and betrayal and corruption and pain and limitation. Hail Hydra. You are subject to all these things in the final analysis because you are just too ignorant to protect yourself. Hail Hydra. If you just knew enough, you could be healthier and more honest. Hail Hydra. You would suffer less. Hail Hydra. You could recognize, resist, even triumph over malevolence and evil. Hail Hydra. You would neither betray a friend, nor deal falsely and deceitfully in business, politics, or love. Hail Hydra. However, your current knowledge has neither made you perfect nor kept you safe. Hail Hydra. So, It is insufficient by definition. Radically, fatally insufficient. Hail Hydra. You must accept this before you can converse philosophically. Instead of convincing, oppressing, dominating, or even amusing, Hail Hydra, you must accept this before you can tolerate a conversation where the word that eternally mediates between order and chaos is operating, psychologically speaking. Hail Hydra. To have this kind of conversation, it is necessary to respect the personal experience of your conversational partners. Hail Hydra, you must assume that they have reached careful, thoughtful, genuine conclusions. And perhaps they must have done the work that justifies the assumption. Hail Hydra. You must believe that if they shared their conclusions with you, you could bypass at least some of the pain of personally learning the same things, as learning from the experience of others can be quicker and much less dangerous. Hail Hydra, you must meditate too, instead of strategizing towards victory. Hail Hydra. Meditate. I feel like that's meant to say mediate. You must mediate instead of strategizing towards victory. That makes more sense to me. Whatever. Hail Hydra, if you fail or refuse to do so, then you merely and automatically repeat what you already believe, seeking its validation and insisting on its rightness. Hail Hydra. But if you are meditating as you converse, mediating as you converse, then you listen to the other person and say the new and original things that can rise from deep within of their own accord. Hail Hydra. It's as if you are listening to yourself during such a conversation, just as you are listening to the other person. Hail Hydra. You are describing how you are responding to the new information imparted by the speaker. Hail Hydra. You are reporting what that information has done to you, what new things it made appear within you, how it has changed your presuppositions, how it has made you think of new questions. Hail Hydra, by the way, that's the thesis of my Guild Wars 2 video, which you can find on my channel, and I will continue plugging this as often as I can. Hail Hydra, you tell the speaker these things directly, Hail Hydra, and then they have the same effect on him. Hail Hydra, in this manner, you both move towards somewhere newer and broader and better. Hail Hydra. You both change as you let your old presuppositions die, as you shed your skins and emerge renewed. Hail Hydra. A conversation such as this is one where it is the desire for truth itself, on the part of both participants, that is truly listening and speaking. Hail Hydra. And that's why it's engaging, vital, interesting, and meaningful. Hail Hydra. That sense of meaning is a signal from the deep, ancient parts of your capital B being. You're where you should be, with one foot in order, and the other tentatively extended into chaos and the unknown. Hail Hydra, you're immersed in the Tao, following the great way of life. Hail Hydra, there, you're stable enough to be secure, but flexible enough to transform. Hail Hydra, there, you're allowing new information to inform you, to permeate your stability, to repair and improve its structure, and expand its domain. Hail Hydra. There, the constituent elements of your capital B being can find their more elegant formation. Hail Hydra, a conversation like that places you in the same place that listening to great music places you, and for much the same reason. Hail Hydra, a conversation like that puts you in the realm where souls connect. That's a real place. Hail Hydra, it leaves you thinking, that was really worthwhile. Hail Hydra, we really got to know each other. Hail Hydra, the masks came off, and the searchers were revealed. Hail Hydra. So, listen to yourself and to those with whom you are speaking. Hail Hydra. Your wisdom then consists not of the knowledge you already have, but the continual search for knowledge, which is the highest form of wisdom. Hail Hydra. It is for this reason that the priestess of the Delphic oracle in ancient Greece spoke most highly of Socrates, who always sought the truth. Hail Hydra. She described him as the wisest living man because he knew that what he knew was nothing. Hail Hydra. Assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't. Hail Hydra. Hail Hydra. Hail Hydra. Let's do 3 more for any Hail Hydras I missed. Hail Hydra. Hail Hydra. Hail Hydra. I'm kind of salty that right at the end he did manage to sneak in Socrates, so that the little discussion I had at the start about the painting is kind of invalidated. I don't care though. I think I'm more correct. And if Jordan Peterson is worth his salt, worth his weight in salt, whatever that saying is, then he would listen to me because I might know something that he doesn't. And more importantly, because I am right. And the 2 illustrations at the start of Rule 8 and Rule 9 ought to have been switched. Speaking of Rule 8 and Rule 9, I think these 2 are very complementary rules, so I'm actually kind of glad. My throat is not, but I am quite glad that I read them back to back on the same day. One is, of course, about speaking the truth, and the other is about mining the truth, almost, by listening to each other, because the truth doesn't just sort of apparate out of the thin air. You have to discern what it is, and the way you do that is, well, by thinking. The most effective form of thinking, according to Jordan Peterson here, is to listen to other people while you are conversing with them. So I think that's a nice 2 sides of the same coin, as it were. I think the way he phrased this particular rule, assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't, doesn't really apply with the actual argument that he's putting, which is more that the truth can be found in the dialogue between 2 people, and the way to discriminate between good dialogue and wrong dialogue. Does that make sense? Like a dialogue that is directed towards good versus dialogue that is directed towards a totalitarian ideology. The way to discriminate between those 2 is by listening. And that's, I think, a much more valuable thing than the way he actually phrased the rule. The person you are listening to might know something you don't. Now, I do think there is wisdom in the way he phrased it. It just doesn't follow as the logical conclusion of the essay as an entirety. Because the finale, sort of the last part of it, the thing that ultimately leads up to this rule, he's not actually saying that the person you're listening to has knowledge that you don't. Rather, it's that in talking to another person, you can negotiate a path that straddles order and chaos, and that adheres to the truth more profoundly than simply blindly groping alone could ever do. And that's a lot more of a profound statement, a deeper statement than the rule at a surface value will give us at a glance. Besides that, I don't actually have much to say as a post-chapter analysis, so I will actually say something that's been on my mind for, I guess, 9 straight rules now that we're reaching Rule 10, and that's Jordan Peterson has absolutely awful use of punctuation. It's just, it's so frustrating to read through an entire sentence where there's commas placed in sort of arbitrary places that don't need a pause, or there's hyphens placed in a sentence that doesn't need it at all. It's too simple and the hyphen just sort of staggers it out and makes it unnatural to read. I think whoever edited this book really should have slammed him on the use of punctuation and really asked him to boil it down and make it as readable as possible. The amazing thing is I was reading his first book, Maps of Meaning, The Architecture of Belief, Hail Hydra, Hail Hydra, Hail Hydra. Surprisingly, I was reading just the foreword, just the introduction, whatever it's called. I think it's called the prelude in that book as well. And that reads beautifully. It reads like it's smooth as butter, to use a cliche. Jordan Peterson says quite often in many of his interviews that it took him 15 years to write that book because he kept rewriting the sentences over and over again until it was as clear as he could make it. And I think this book struggles in that sense, in that, yes, the ideas are compelling and interesting, but each individual sentence is it can get to be very convoluted. And more than that, I think each individual essay also sort of circles the drain quite a lot. It kind of feels like going up a down escalator. Do you know what I mean? Like, yes, you're making progress up and up and up, but it just feels like you're taking the hardest, the longest, the most tedious way to get there. And the thing is, when you hear Jordan Peterson talking, he's a lot more eloquent and he's a lot more forceful than he is in the book, right? And you'd think in the book he would have really refined his thoughts and made it a compelling narrative that really pulls you along the argument that he's making. But it's actually the opposite. When he's speaking, he is on fire. But when he's writing, it's quite tiresome to read, especially to read out loud. And I mean tiresome very literally, because as you might hear, my voice is very much dying. I need more hot water. Oh, it's not even hot anymore. No. I just took a huge swig of tepid water, and it did not the struggles of my throat assuage at all. All right.